when we when we talk about the DevOps life cycle, so there is a process called software development life cycle. So in software development life cycle, we go with getting the requirement. Like, let's take an example of building a product. We are getting a requirement to build a car, or build a house, or build a software for real estate, software for a manufacturing company, software for a, let's say, infrastructure company. It could be any segment, any business segment. So first thing is we get the requirements. Once we analyze the requirements, we go with high level and low level designing. High level design is overall view, and low level designing is unit wise view. So take an example of manufacturing a car. So once you see the requirements, or once they complete the requirement, they come up with a AutoCAD designings, right? So there
Mhm.
they can have 2D designs or 3D designs. They can have 360 degrees view, external view, internal view. And when we go to the internal view, you can see different sub segments, sub units, like the brake system and even the music system, everything they talk about. That is the designing. And once the designing is completed, they actually start implementing the product, implementing the car, implementing the vehicle. And that includes the coding, creating the parts, manufacturing the parts, and building once they manufacture the products, they build the products, build the car, that is uh, the entire shape. And then once they build the product, they do a testing of the product that includes the unit testing, where developers are doing the testing. And then we can have different levels of testing. It could be like dev testing, where the complete developers are doing a peer testing, peer review, and peer testing. And then we can have the functional testing, we can have the regression testing, and then we can have the production live, before live, go live testing. So we there are various cycles of testing usually the projects do. And when I say about the testing, it could be security testing, it could be non-functional performance testing. So all these are the different cycles of testing. We talk more in detail on the testing phase. But once they complete the test, the unit testing, they push the code, they push the product in, they release multiple versions. So that version 1, version 2, and then they do the deployment of the product. And then once they deploy the product in different environments, we call them dev environment, test environment, stage, which is a non-production environment, and finally deploying the product into the live environment, that is the production environments. There are various stages of uh, uh, deployments happen, and finally they go for monitoring the product. So these are the phases we actually go through, not only in the software, in almost every sector, almost in every product development. As I said, like even for house construction, we go with the same steps. Okay, so first one is we get the requirements. Is it going to be an individual house or a flat? Okay, is it going to be a villa or a one-stair building or two-stair building or three-stair building? And then we go one level down. How many bedrooms? How many? Is it a 2 BHK, 3 BHK, or 4 BHK? And then in once we go deeper, uh, the kitchen, where is the kitchen going to be? What are the different uh, uh, cabinets that we need in kitchen, in hall, in bedroom? That entire information we grab. And then now we have the pictorial representation of how the future state of the house construction or the flat construction is going to be. Then the engineering team will start building the house, the construction team is start building the house, and part of the construction they do unit testing. So supervisor will do the unit testing, ensuring that the shaping up in the expected way of the customer. Then they will actually go for a quality check QC, where the different teams do the validation and verification of the product, end product, and also the tools that they are using in terms of bricks or RCC, whatever those are. And then they actually do a version wise release. Like if there is a three-stair building, they construct first floor, basement, then first floor, second floor. That is where we call releases. Release 1, release 2, and release 3. And then finally, they hand over the flat or the individual house to the customer, and they give 1 year warranty maintenance cycle, where they ask customer to use the product and look at what are the different like the tap system, electricity system, everything. They ask the customer to review, validate by using the tools. If customer find any issues as part of the maintenance support, builder is going to either replace that product and give the required support. That is part of the operation and monitor. So as I said, not only limiting to one segment, we are using the life cycle, product life cycle almost everywhere. So when we talk about the DevOps life cycle, we have the continuous development, continuous testing, continuous deployment, and continuous monitoring. So these are the stages we see. Two on the left hand side where we are involved in development of the product, and two on the right hand side where the operations are involved. And we are combining these two, the dev and operations, with continuous integration. So there is a continuous integration between the development testing and to the deployment and monitoring. So this is the entire DevOps life cycle we see in every project. Okay. And then now when we talk about the DevOps tools, there are various tools we have in every phase of the DevOps cycle. So when we talk about the plan, so for planning, as part of the Azure DevOps, we use Azure boards. So Azure boards we mainly used for project management. So when I say a project management, I gave the example of a requirement of constructing a house, okay, or building a television or building a car. Okay, that is the requirement. Now, when we are breaking down that high level requirement into smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces, we are actually including part of our project dashboard, or we are calling project backlog, where we are saying, okay, these are the high level requirements, and these are the breakdown of the high level requirements, and this is the time frame that we will be expecting to complete these requirements. So it could be 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, and that entire functional breakdown we are capturing in a project management tool, and then we are tracking the entire progress of the tasks that we are completing or we are targeting to complete in the project by using the project management tool. And as I said, we have in general in the projects in the organizations, they use either Jira as the project management tool, or some organizations use Rally, and some organizations use different tools like Swift Kanban is another tool that organizations use. But as our focus is more towards Azure DevOps, we are going to use Azure boards for the planning phase. Now, once we have the requirement, when I say coders are writing the code, they want to maintain that code in a centralized location so that they can collaborate with other developers, they can share the code with other developers, or they can get the code which is written by other developers in the project. Like if there is only one developer in the project, he can do all the changes, he can build, deploy or the product. But if there are 10 developers who are writing the code for the same module or for the same project, not easy to maintain that code, not easy to share that code between these 10 members uh, in a manual way. So we'll talk too deeper on how what are the problem statements we have with uh, maintaining the common code between 10 developers, how version control system or we can call it source code management system, SCM or VCS systems are helping us to maintain the code in the centralized location so that multiple developers can get that code, can manage that code, can push their changes into the centralized repository, and that entire implementation is done through Azure Repos. Okay, Azure Repos is a centralized distributed version control system, and that is built on top of GitHub repository. Okay, we will be talking more in detail on what is version control and what is centralized version control, what is distributed version control system, and we will be talking on how we are going to use Git as a version control system and different tools, different commands in Git and in Azure repos through version control system. So that is mainly for maintaining the code, project code, which is implementing by multiple developers in the source code management tool or a centralized distributed version control systems. Okay, so that's basically the Azure repo. And then once developers are writing the code, they need to convert that human understandable language into a machine understandable language. We know human understandable language, all English, but machine not going to understand your language, our language, which is in alphabets, right? Which is in Roman letters or alphabet. So machine understands only zeros and ones. So we want a translator, a converter, which is going to convert a human understandable language into a machine understandable language. And that is what we call a compilation or converting a source code into a byte code. And byte code is zeros and ones. And to convert that, we use different tools. And those tools are Maven, Gradle, or long back we used Apache Ant. So these are called build tools, which are actually combining all your source code or packaging all your source code into a big bundle, which is a zip file. You know the zip file, right? Compressed file where we have multiple files clubbed into a folder, and that folder we are compressing, and that is called a archive file. And we create an archive file from the source code using the build tools. And in Azure, we use Azure Artifactory. Okay, we use Azure Artifacts, and Azure Artifacts is built on Maven, Gradle. Depends on the type of application you are implementing. You take a call on whether you want to use Maven or Gradle, or for .NET applications, yeah, we have different tools like MS Build. It all depends on the language that you are using to build your product. Okay, so Azure Artifacts is the tool we are using for building. And testing, we do unit testing with JUnit or NUnit, and functional testing with Selenium. Okay, so we have Azure tests as well. So we'll talk in detail on Azure tests. Now, on the other side, when we talk about the release, so it is more like running the pipelines, running various stages of your project, like con converting your source code into a binary format. Before that, making sure you are getting the latest code from the repository, from Azure repo. And once you get the latest code, how you are building the project, how you are packaging the product, and how you are building the project. That entire Operation, we are calling pipelines, and we make use of the pipelines to define various stages of your DevOps pipelines. I mean, DevOps process, which I already mentioned, like getting the latest code, building the product, deploying the product. All these are the stages, and we define all these stages or maintain all these stages part of the continuous integration or release cycle. And we use different tools again for the release. The very widely used open source CI/CD tool is Jenkins. Very often you hear organizations using Jenkins as their pipelines. And some organizations now started moving away from Jenkins to GitHub Actions. Okay, that is another pipeline that we are using. And in Azure, we have Azure pipelines. Okay, so we extensively use Azure pipelines to define different stages of the DevOps cycle. And we define all the stages. Inside every stage, we define multiple steps. Okay, we go deeper on how we define those stages, steps, part of the Azure pipeline, right? And as I said, like once you have the source code converted into a binary format, these days we don't want a virtual machine. We don't want to deploy our application, run our application on a physical machine or a virtual machine. Rather, we want to run as independent containers. And to create those independent containers, we use Docker. Okay. And Docker is a containerization platform. And using Docker, we are ensuring that we are running a self-maintained, self-running application in any environment through the Docker containers, containerization platform. And Docker is the default containerization platform most of the organizations using. And when we are actually defining the Docker images, we will be seeing on how we are pushing those Docker images into a registry in Azure, and that registry is called ACR, Azure Container Registry. Okay, that is for Dockerization. And then once we have the containers pushed into ACR, Azure Container Registry, we will be seeing on how we are deploying those container images into a cluster, a orchestration platform, and that orchestration clustered platform is called Kubernetes. Okay, we will be looking at how we are defining the Kubernetes namespaces, Kubernetes configurations, how we are pushing, or after pushing the image into the ACR, how we are pulling it from the ACR and then deploying it into the Kubernetes environment. And we will be talking on AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service. So we'll be showing Kubernetes as a standalone and also AKS as a managed Kubernetes service. Then we'll be covering the Terraform as well, but not going to detail on the Terraform, but it's more like touch basing with Terraform on infrastructure as code, how we are creating the infrastructure as a code. Like if we want to create a Kubernetes cluster in Azure environment, how we are going to do that through Terraform. And then once you deploy the application, we want to monitor the application. Like how much is the RAM utilizing by the application? How much is the disk space utilizing by the application? How many data inputs and data outputs in terms of the network throughput? That entire information we want to monitor. And to monitor, we are using Azure Monitoring. That is the tool we are extensively using, Azure Monitoring, audit logs, audit trails. And I will be looking at some part of Grafana dashboards. Okay, that's basically the tools we are using. So I'm repeating that. You can mute Manoranjan. Thank you. So for planning, we are using Azure boards, coding, maintaining the central distributed repositories through Azure repos, and build with Azure artifacts, and test with Azure Test, release with Azure pipelines, and ACR for registry of maintaining the Docker images, and AKS for Kubernetes cluster. And then last one, for monitoring the application, we use either Grafana or Azure monitoring. Okay, so this is these are the tools we are mainly going to talk. And the way I cover this session is the same. I will be going through the PowerPoint presentations, and I will be sharing the running notes every day. And there are hands-on exercises. So I will be asking individuals to complete hands-on exercises. That is up to the individuals. I'm not going to push them, to be honest with everyone, but it's the individual's responsibility to complete those hands-on exercises, and if assignment for every tool. And finally, there is a project, simple project I will be covering, which is going to cover all the phases of DevOps lifecycle, starting from Azure boards, repos, artifacts, Azure pipelines, then ACR, AKS, and monitoring. So that is going to be a sample web application going to be built on Java based. So total course content is I'll be covering the total course in 40 hours. That includes the lab section and the topic. So every topic is going to be followed by lab section. Okay. So that's basically on the DevOps. Let me show you how I will cover. So just for example of version control system, I will be showing you, I'll be covering this PDF. I'll be explaining you the concepts in version control.
So
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. So in version control, you are going to Git or VS Code or something other?
VS Code is different, Git is different. VS Code is the editor.
Uh-huh.
It's a you. It's like IntelliJ, VS Code. These are the editors, Manoranjan. Okay,
Okay.
you can use any editor.
Uh-huh.
Git is a version control system where you are maintaining the code. Okay, so there were couple of tools like Bitbucket,
Uh-huh.
Git, and SVN. Okay, so GitLab is another one. So these are the tools for the distributed version control system, distributed code base, maintaining the code base. And the editors, as I said, like Eclipse, VS Code, IntelliJ, these are the editors. We can use any editor. So VS Code is openly available. So we can use VS Code as editor.
Okay.
IDE, we call it Integrated Development Environment.
Okay.
Okay, so this is how I will be covering what are this is the PDF. And finally, there are questions I will be covering end of the session. And then
So one more thing, as you to mention that it will be taking 40 hours. So that will be on Monday to Friday, daily 1 hour or 1.5 hour or something else.
we talk more on that. I didn't talk to the facilitator at the moment, Manoranjan, on that. You will hear more from the facilitator. Okay,
Okay.
yeah, it's not yet planned. It's a demo session, correct? So, and here, this is the hands-on, the labs section that I will be sharing with individuals. Okay, where you will be doing a hands-on exercises. What happened? Yeah, you will be doing hands-on exercises like all these steps. How you are going to create a repository in your local file system, how you are converting it into a Git repo, and then when you are doing some changes in your local file system, how you are pushing those changes into the Git repository, and then the branching strategy, merging strategy, and how we are creating PRs. pull request or peer review using the PR process in Git. So these PDFs I will be sharing with individuals part of the hands-on. And the assignment, so yes, there are 2 assignments for Git. So I'll be sharing this, asking individuals to complete this assignment. Okay. So this is basically how we'll be covering. And usually how I go with to answer your question, Manoranjan, it will be 1 hour every day, and it is weekdays. Okay, that
Okay.
is the approach I go with.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
So could you please show the like what are the topics or modules we will cover as a Azure DevOps especially?
Yeah, I did mention
Like
that,
what are the
right?
services we will use it?
Yes,
Yeah,
you
that is
mentioned by profile.
tutorial things, right?
Yeah, basically, like as I said, Azure boards we start with. Okay, Azure boards basically for the requirement gathering and converting those requirements into smaller pieces with functional breakdown. So we'll be showing how we are creating the users. We have I'll be talking about the Scrum as well. How we are creating epics, themes, features, and user stories, and how we are splitting user stories into tasks. Because when you are implementing a new product, a new implementation in the project, you need to split it down into smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces are called tasks. Okay, when you are creating the task as part of the Scrum call, you are going to provide estimate. Okay, your lead is not going to provide estimate. So how you are going to provide estimate, on what basis you are going to provide estimation, that I will be covering part of the Azure boards. Okay, and then when you are creating task, how you are updating the hours and how you are updating the description comments every day before close of the day or at the starting of the day, so that you are providing up to date info, up to date status on the work that you are doing. Okay, that is part of Azure boards. And then second one I did mention, Azure repos. It is built on top of Git. Okay, so they are using Git internally, but Azure repo is a managed version control system by Azure. So I'll be showing you how we are creating the repositories through Azure repos, and how we are going with uh, branching and merging strategy for these repositories in Azure repo. Okay, and then I said about Azure artifacts, where we have the Maven, we have the for .NET application, we have the MS build. Okay, and as a, we can use one of these compilation build tools, part of the Azure artifacts. Okay, and again, it is all Node.js. They have the artifacts. Okay, and I will be covering Artifactory as well. That is JFrog Artifactory. That is not from the Azure front, but I will be covering what are the alternatives we have. Not completely, just touching on those tools as well, so that you are going to aware. Okay, there are alternatives for the tools that we are using. Okay, and then part of the Azure release process, continuous integration process, Azure pipelines. Okay, Azure pipelines, I will be explaining on what are the different stages you are creating in Azure pipelines, and how we are going to create YAML files with low code. When I say low code, 5 lines, 10 lines of code, not more than that. There is again an easy way of creating the stages and creating the steps in each stage. And as I said, stages like how you are getting the latest code from the repository, how you are building the product, how we are releasing the product, how you are deploying the product. So everything we write in a step-by-step process in Azure pipelines, and that entire process is called pipeline. Okay, and the services wise, ACR is another service we are using in Azure, where we are once we create the Docker images, we are pushing those Docker images into Azure Container Registry. And then AKS is the service, which is Kubernetes. So Azure Kubernetes service, how we are creating cluster, how we are pushing the changes, pushing our uh, image into the ACR, and then how AKS is pulling that Docker image and then deploying the Docker image into the Kubernetes cluster, right? And then I said about Azure monitoring. So Azure monitoring tool basically for checking the health of the application and resource utilization of the uh, application. And in addition to that, I'll be covering Azure Web Services, App Services. That is mainly like how we are running web applications in Azure. So virtual machine is another one, Azure VM, that we will be covering part of the application deployment in a virtual machine. Okay, and then IAC. So I'm not covering ARM templates here, but it will be more on Terraform infrastructure as code. Okay, so these are the tools I will be covering, Priyaranjan. And the tools which I had shown you, those are most of them are from open source, which are not which doesn't need license. Okay, that's the reason I actually shown them as a general DevOps tools, and Azure has equivalent managed tools.
So I'm just navigating the course modules, right? The one which is mentioned in the Google Drive. It is showing that 60 days duration, and last session is session 13, special real-time use cases, like
Mhm.
designing a CI/CD pipeline using the Azure DevOps and container CI/CD using Jenkins and Kubernetes on Azure Kubernetes and cluster, immutable infrastructure CI/CD using Jenkins and Terraform and Azure infrastructure.
Mhm.
So many things are there. So I was a bit confused actually.
Okay,
So
but yeah, go with what I mentioned here, what I covered here. So, as I said, like part of the DevOps pipeline, DevOps process, we are covering as I said, I'm reiterating that Azure boards, Azure repo, Azure artifacts, okay, and then Azure pipelines, ACR, AKS, and Terraform, and finally Azure monitoring. These are the tools we'll be going deeper, Priranjan. And as I
um,
say, good.
um, Maven,
Maven is Azure Artifacts. Azure Artifacts is basically a build tool that we'll be using, and depends on what language you are writing your code, you are going to use the build tool. Okay, that could be Maven, that could be Gradle, that could be MS Build. And if it is a Python based, there is a build tool available for Python in Azure Artifacts, and Node.js is another one. So Maven we will be covering part of the build tool.
of this 40-hour sessions, like how many years of experience can we can showcase, right? To the
That all depends on how confident you are going to be once you complete your training, Priranjan.
so we are all like experienced person actually. So like we move to our role into the DevOps, especially Azure DevOps. Okay, so that's
That's
what.
what I'm saying. Like see, once I cover the topics, okay, there are hands-on exercises. How, how proficient you are going to be in those hands-on. It all depends on how much time you are going to spend, how much confidence you are going to gain, Priranjan. Okay. So I'll be covering and the assignment, I'll be giving the assignments. As I said earlier, it's up to the individuals. It's a responsibility of the individual to complete those assignments. If you are completing those assignments, that means you are gaining confidence. Correct? And once you gain the confidence, you can straight away say, okay, I'm now good in the tools. Because when I'm going to cover the topics, I'm not going to give you too much bhashan or too much theory there. I will be covering the real-time examples, and I will be covering the real time, the same, I will be covering the real time scenarios, and I will be asking the questions which you can expect in the interviews. Okay. So I'll be asking the questions, not just covering the topics and saying, okay, it's done. Rather, I will be asking questions, and I will be asking questions in different ways as well. So that you start thinking, okay, this question I can expect from the interview, and there are most of the times you don't expect direct questions from the interviewer. Okay, it's all the time a scenario based question. So I will be covering them. Okay, for every topic.
Yeah, generally, if we are switching the projects to move our role into the Azure DevOps, they're
Got you.
asking what projects you have worked so far in your previous organizations or previous role. That's what.
No, I will see. That's what I'm saying. It is more a job readiness training, Priranjan. Okay, so we will be covering more towards how you can crack the interview when you are going to the for the DevOps position. Clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Good questions.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead, Harsh.
Actually, I want to know how much coding required for this Azure.
Low code. When I
Low
say low
code,
code, like 5 lines of code, 10 lines of code max to max. That is more real time English language. You don't need to be proficient in coding, Harsh. So like as I said, stages. So you'll be talking about how you are building, how you are deploying, what steps you are writing in YAML file. So that will be 5 to 10 lines max to max. And
okay,
day one, you are not jumping into code. Okay.
okay. Actually, I do not need much about. I don't know much about the codings. So
I
coding
start
part is
with, sorry to interrupt. I start with a person as a layman, zero knowledge. Don't worry on
okay,
that.
okay.
Okay. Okay. And even if someone having knowledge, I straight away ask them to use these sessions as recap. But I'm not going to think that someone got knowledge. For me, everyone having no knowledge. That's how I start these sessions. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you, Gopi.
Okay. Perfect. Then, yeah, have a great rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.